Hello, YouTube plant-loving people. Welcome back to episode 2 of my Alaska tropical plant adventure. I thought today that I would share some of the plants that came up with me from Florida, in particular my most vulnerable, delicate plants. These are plants that when I was in Florida were not able to even tolerate the low levels of humidity of 70 to 80% and needed to live in a terrarium to thrive. And so obviously coming up here, I'm going to continue that same technique of terrarium living for these plants. These are plants that I brought up with me directly on the airplane. I obviously did not bring them up in these big old glass jars. I deconstructed each of the terrariums in Florida and wrapped each plant individually in sphagnum moss and transported it in these hard plastic containers. And then when I got up here, I bought these glass jars at one of our local grocery stores for like $15 each. And for the most part, they seem to be doing well. One of the plants in particular suffered quite a bit on the trip, but fingers crossed, I'm hoping that it'll thrive now that it's in its new habitat. Little bit of a word on the substrate that I'm using for these terrariums. This is the same substrate that I used in Florida. It's my own concoction. It's a mix of, you can see at the bottom, I've got large pieces of either bark, wood, in this particular case, they're coconut pieces, and then up a little bit more as you get further up to the top. It becomes a mix, a graduating mix of coconut pith and coconut fibers. The fibers enable a lot more aeration, and the coconut pith, it enables more wetness, so a little bit more water retention. And by graduating it up so that it's a little bit more on the top of coconut fibers with the pith towards the bottom, it helps decrease the risk of root rot on these plants. And they've been in these terrariums for about 2 weeks now and seem to be bouncing back fairly well. Over here in this terrarium, you can see the big green jewel orchid is that my Macodes jewel orchid. I've got a cutting over here. This tends to be, in this environment, a pretty hardy plant. It's done really well. It's actually put out, since it's been up here, a couple of new leaves. And I just think it's a showstopper. Behind it, over here, this maroon, this is another jewel orchid. This is the Lusidia discolor. This is probably the most hardy of any of these plants. The Lusidia that I had in Florida was huge. It took up its own whole terrarium on its own. I actually, when I got up here, separated it out into a couple of pieces in each, and even had some left over that I have potted in a pretty coconut pith heavy substrate here. The coconut pith tends to keep their feet a little bit more wet. This is a ground dwelling orchid, so it likes that. So I'm anticipating that as this gets settled, it's just gonna fill this whole pot. You can see here the hardest hit plant that I had, you can see, is this. Then I have a little bit more here. This is a type of tropical begonia. It's called the Begonia bipinnatifida. I'll put the name up. But my plant that I had in Florida was stunning. It was large, it was full. I'll insert a picture of it. But the transport did not treat it well, and a lot of the leaves and branches were damaged and almost liquefied. So I'm really hoping that getting it settled in now in both of these terrariums, that I'll start to see some recovery. I do have one new leaf coming in here, and the same on this side. I've got a couple of new leaves coming in. So I'm hoping that it'll bounce back because it really is just a beautiful plant, and it's becoming a little bit more easy to find now, but historically it was always a very hard plant to get a hold of. So this one here, this is probably my favorite plant of all of the plants that I have in my collection. This is a Marcgravia. It's a type of tropical shingling plant. You'll see that it'll often crawl up walls and shingle. This is a Marcgravia spa. It's a species plant. I don't have the identification of it. I was able to source this through Equigenaria at one of the plant shows at Fairchild a few years ago. And I just love it because you can just see that it has these luxurious, shiny velvet leaves that when they come in super red and super like satiny sheeny, and it's just so beautiful, and it seems to have done really well in the trip up, so I'm really happy for this. And then you can see over here I've got another jewel orchid. This is also a Lusidia discolor, the same type of orchid as this one, except for this is the alba, so obviously it's white instead of maroon. This always, for me, had been a very delicate orchid. I had a hard time getting it to thrive in Florida, but I noticed just the other day that I have a new shoot coming up here. And then I don't know if you can see back there behind the Macodes is another one. So it's looking like it's really liking its new environment. So I'm hoping that it'll continue to thrive. And then another one of my showstoppers and a favorite plant is this one. This is an Alocasia, so an elephant ear plant. This one in particular is called the zebrina, named so because of these stripes on the stalk, but this is the reticulata, and you can see that the leaf has just this beautiful reticulated dark and light green pattern. And this is another one that I'm super excited for. Since it got into its new habitat, it's put out a pup. So I'm really excited. So I've got the one here, which isn't thriving quite as much as over here, and then I've got the new pup. So this is the one plant that I ended up getting these super tall containers for, is because this is gonna get larger. As it gets larger, as it matures, it's gonna become a lot more stable, and I'll actually be able to pull it out of the terrarium entirely and have it as a houseplant. So yeah, very excited for that. And then, you can see I've got a little bit of a stowaway oxalis here. But those are my delicate babies. I have them in a well-lit but indirect sunlight in one of the bedrooms on the windowsill. So hopefully they will continue to thrive. Anyway, have a great day. Thanks.